I'm Jessica, 28, and the day I became a software engineer should have been the proudest moment of my life. Instead, I stood alone in my cap and gown, checking my phone for the 100th time. My parents had promised they'd be there. That night, scrolling through Instagram, my heart shattered. There they were, champagne glasses raised, celebrating my sister Amber's promotion to assistant manager at a clothing store. I'd been paying their rent for 3 years at that point. That day, I learned family loyalty isn't guaranteed, it's conditional, and sometimes you have to be the one to set the terms. Before I dive into the story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Trust me, what happens next will show you exactly why sometimes cutting ties is the only way to save yourself. Growing up, I was always the responsible one in my family. From as early as I can remember, my parents, Robert and Karen, had different expectations for me compared to my younger sister Amber. While I was expected to maintain straight, as help with housework, and eventually get a part-time job at 16 to contribute to household expenses, Amber was free to focus on her social life and hobbies. My parents would rationalize this by saying Jessica is so smart and capable she doesn't need help like Amber does. My parents weren't terrible people, just deeply flawed ones. Dad worked as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical company, decent money, but he was terrible with finances. Mom had been a substitute teacher on and off, but preferred being home. They lived paycheck to paycheck despite a middle-class income, constantly making poor financial decisions that left them struggling. From a young age, I became aware of our different treatment. When I was 12, I saved up for 6 months to buy a $200 calculator I needed for advanced math. That same month, my parents spent $300 on a shopping spree for Amber because she was feeling down. When I tried pointing this out, they'd say I was being selfish and that siblings shouldn't compete. By the time I graduated high school, I had already accepted that I was on my own. I received several scholarship offers, but none covered the full cost of attendance. My parents had saved nothing for my college education, having spent what little extra they had on Amber's dance lessons and social activities. "You're smart enough to figure it out," my dad told me when I asked about financial help. I worked 3 part-time jobs through college, while maintaining a 3.9 gigapascals in computer science. I lived off ramen and coffee, pulled all-nighters to finish assignments after work shifts, and sometimes had to choose between textbooks and groceries. Meanwhile, my parents paid for Amber to attend community college, bought her a used car for her 18th birthday, and continued to fund her shopping habits. During my senior year, a tech startup recruited me for an internship that turned into a job offer upon graduation. The starting salary was more than my parents had ever made combined. When I told them the news, their first response was, "That's great, you can help us with some of our bills now." And I did. 3 months after starting my job, my parents called in tears. They were facing eviction due to unpaid rent. Without hesitation, I paid their back rent and began covering their monthly housing costs. I told myself it was the right thing to do. They were family after all, and this is what successful children did for their parents. My best friend Megan was the first to point out the imbalance. "Jess, do you realize you're paying your parents' rent while they're still buying Amber designer clothes?" she asked one day over coffee. I brushed it off, making excuses about Amber still finding her way, and my parents just wanting to help her. Despite my financial success, I still struggled with feelings of inadequacy around my family. No accomplishment was ever quite enough. When I was promoted 6 months into my job, my mom's response was, "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Amber got an employee discount at her retail job? She's giving us all her discount for Christmas." The pattern continued for years. I'd achieved something significant in my career, and my parents would either downplay it or immediately pivot to something Amber had done. When I bought my first apartment at 25, they spent more time at my housewarming party talking about Amber's new boyfriend than my achievement of becoming a homeowner. Yet, despite the clear favoritism, I maintained my relationship with them. I called weekly, visited monthly, and continued supporting them financially. I told myself that they were just proud of both their daughters in different ways. I convinced myself that Amber needed their validation more than I did. I suppressed the hurt, the disappointment, and the growing resentment until my graduation day changed everything. After 3 years of working full-time while taking night classes, I finally completed my master's in computer science. It had been a grueling journey, coding all day at work, then rushing to campus for evening lectures, staying up until 2 a.m. to complete assignments, and somehow maintaining both my job performance and a 4 gigapascals. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in May. 3 months in advance, I called my parents to ensure they'd be there. "Of course we'll be there, Jessica. We wouldn't miss it for the world," my mother had assured me. I had even offered to pay for their flights and hotel room, which they happily accepted. In the weeks leading up to graduation, I made elaborate plans. I reserved front row seats for them at the ceremony, made dinner reservations at an upscale restaurant that required a $200 deposit, and even arranged for a professional photographer to capture the moment when I would receive my diploma with my family cheering me on. The day before graduation, I called to confirm their flight arrival time. "Oh, we're all packed and ready. See you tomorrow, sweetie," my mom said cheerfully. I spent that evening preparing the guest room in my apartment, buying their favorite snacks, and even placing a small gift basket on their bed. A thank you for coming to support me. Graduation morning arrived and I was filled with anticipation. I got ready, put on my cap and gown, and took an obligatory selfie to send to my parents. "Can't wait to see you soon," I texted along with the photo. There was no response, but I assumed they were on the plane. As the ceremony start time approached, I kept checking my phone. No calls, no texts. I tried calling them, but it went straight to voicemail. They must be having trouble with the rental car, I told myself, trying to stay positive. Or maybe their phone batteries died. The ceremony began. I sat alone while my classmates were surrounded by proud families. Each time I glanced at the empty seats I had reserved, my stomach twisted tighter. During the procession, I scanned the audience, desperately hoping to see them slipping in late. Nothing. When my name was called and I walked across the stage, there was no familiar cheer, no flash of a camera capturing my moment. Just polite applause from strangers. I fought back tears as I accepted my diploma, forcing a smile for the official photographer. After the ceremony, classmates introduced me to their families while I made awkward excuses for my absent parents. "Travel issues," I muttered the lie, burning my throat. I canceled the dinner reservation, losing my deposit, and drove home alone, still checking my phone every few minutes for any message explaining their absence. At home, I called them repeatedly. No answer. I called my sister, straight to voicemail. A knot of worry began to form. Were they okay? Had something happened, I was about to call hospitals when I decided to check social media. That's when I saw it. My sister had posted just an hour earlier a photo of her with my parents at an upscale restaurant. The caption read, "Celebrating my promotion to assistant manager with the best parents ever. Number, blessed number, love my family." My hands trembled as I stared at the image, my parents beaming with pride, raising champagne glasses to Amber's achievement. They were dressed up, clearly having planned this celebration. In the background, I could see decorations, a small banner that read, "Congratulations." I felt physically ill. They hadn't missed my graduation because of an emergency or travel problems. They had deliberately chosen, to skip the most important day of my academic life to celebrate my sister's minor promotion at the retail store where she'd been working part-time. With shaking hands, I called my mother. This time she picked up. "Hello, Jessica. Is the ceremony over?" she asked casually. "Yes, Mom, it's over." "Where were you?" My voice was barely steady. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Something came up. Amber got this last-minute promotion, and they had this celebration thing at work. And you know how important it was for her to have support." "I can see the restaurant, Mom," I interrupted. "I can see the champagne. This wasn't a work thing. You chose to celebrate her promotion instead of coming to my graduation. A promotion to assistant manager at a clothing store instead of my master's degree that I worked 3 years for." "Now, Jessica, don't be like that." My father's voice came through. He was on speakerphone. "Amber really needed us there. You've always been the independent one. We knew you'd understand." "Understand? You let me reserve seats for you. You let me make dinner reservations and pay for flights you never intended to take." "We were going to come," my mother said, her voice defensive now. "But when Amber called crying about her promotion party, we just couldn't say no. You know how fragile she is." I hung up the phone and cried alone in my apartment, surrounded by the snacks and gifts I had bought for parents who couldn't be bothered to show up. That night, as I scrolled through more photos they posted of Amber's celebration, something inside me broke, and something else hardened. The weeks following my graduation were some of the darkest of my life. I called in sick to work for 3 days, unable to get out of bed. When I finally returned, I threw myself into coding, staying late every night just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. Despite my emotional devastation, I didn't immediately stop supporting my parents financially. The next month's rent payment came due, and I made it automatically, as I had for years. Part of me hoped that they would recognize their mistake, that they would make amends somehow. Instead, 2 weeks after graduation, my mother called with a request. "Jessica, the refrigerator is making that noise again. I think we need a new one. Could you send a little extra this month?" I sat in stunned silence for a moment. No acknowledgement of missing my graduation. No apology. Just another financial request. "Sure, Mom," I finally said, my voice hollow. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow." That same week, my sister Amber called for the first time since the incident. I thought perhaps she was reaching out to apologize for her role in my parents' absence. Instead, she spent 20 minutes talking about her new responsibilities as assistant manager and how stressful it was having to train new employees. "By the way," she said casually before hanging up, "thanks for always helping Mom and Dad out. I'm not really in a position to help financially right now with all my expenses. You're so lucky to have that big tech salary." The monthly family dinner the following Sunday was excruciating. My parents acted as if nothing had happened, while Amber dominated the conversation with stories about her promotion. When I tried to share news about a major project I was leading at work, my father interrupted to ask if I'd seen Amber's new name badge with assistant manager on it. As I drove home that night, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The resentment I had suppressed for years was becoming impossible to ignore. That week, I calculated how much money I had given my parents over the past 3 years. $46, 800 inches rent, payments alone, not counting emergency expenses, gifts, and meals out. Meanwhile, I was putting off my own life goals. I wanted to buy a house instead of my small apartment. I wanted to travel. I had student loans I could have paid off years ago. Instead, I was funding my parents' lifestyle while they continued to emotionally invest everything in Amber. At work, I began staying, even later picking up extra projects that came with bonuses. I told myself I was advancing my career, but truthfully, I was working overtime to cover my parents' increasing demands. They had recently mentioned wanting to renovate their bathroom, another expense they expected me to cover. My friend Megan noticed the toll it was taking. After canceling plans with her for the third time to work late, she showed up at my office with takeout. "This has to stop, Jess," she said bluntly as we ate lukewarm Chinese food at my desk. "You're killing yourself to support people who don't appreciate you." "They're my parents," I said weakly. "What am I supposed to do? Let them get evicted." "They're adults who made their choices," Megan replied. "And they're choosing to take advantage of you while giving everything else to your sister." Her words stung because they contained the truth I had been avoiding. That weekend, I had my first appointment with Dr. Reynolds, a therapist Megan had recommended. I spent the entire session crying as I recounted the graduation incident and the years of favoritism that preceded it. "What you're describing is a common dynamic in dysfunctional families," Dr. Reynolds explained gently. "One child becomes the responsible one, or family hero who is expected to achieve and provide, while another becomes the baby who receives the emotional investment." "But why?" I asked through tears. "What did I do wrong?" "Nothing," she assured me. "These roles often form based on the parents' own needs and insecurities, not because of anything the children did. The question now is, what boundaries do you need to set for your own well-being?" The word boundaries was foreign to me. I had never considered that I could limit what my family asked of me. Over the next few sessions, Dr. Reynolds helped me see that my financial support had become an enabler for the dysfunctional dynamic. "Your money is providing the material comfort that allows them to continue emotionally neglecting you without consequences," she explained. "As long as you continue paying, nothing will change." I began to see my situation more clearly. Each rent payment was buying my parents permission to keep treating me as an afterthought. Each extra transfer for emergencies was financing their preferential treatment of Amber. 5 months after graduation, I received a text from my mother. "Dad and I are thinking of taking a cruise for our anniversary. Since you're not using your vacation time to visit us anyway, maybe you could help us out." I stared at the message for a long time, a strange calm settling over me. They weren't just expecting me to fund their basic needs anymore. They were asking me to finance a luxury vacation, while implying I was neglectful for not visiting more often. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my graduation day, standing alone while my parents celebrated Amber. I thought about the 3 jobs I worked through college while they paid Amber's tuition. I thought about the overtime hours I was working to fund their lifestyle while putting my own dreams on hold. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel the anger that had been building for years. And in that anger, I finally found clarity. 6 months after my graduation, my parents' 30th wedding anniversary approached. Despite everything I offered to plan and pay for their celebration, a gesture that my therapist, Dr. Reynolds, gently suggested might be another attempt to earn the approval I'd never received. "Maybe so," I admitted during our session, "but they're still my parents. And 30 years of marriage is worth celebrating." I spent weeks organizing the perfect anniversary party. I booked a private room at an upscale restaurant, ordered a custom 3-tier cake that cost $600, arranged for a string quartet to play their wedding song, and even created a memorial video featuring photos from their 3 decades together. The total cost came to just over $5,000, money I could have put toward my house down payment fund. I invited all their friends, my sister Amber, and several extended family members. I flew in my dad's brother from Arizona and my mom's college roommate from Florida, covering their travel expenses as well. I wanted this to be perfect, perhaps still hoping that a grand enough gesture would finally make them see me. The night of the party arrived. Everything looked beautiful. My parents seemed genuinely surprised and delighted by the elaborate celebration. For a brief moment, as they entered the room to applause from their friends and family, I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Maybe this would be the turning point in our relationship. The dinner portion of the evening went smoothly. The food was excellent, the string quartet provided elegant background music, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. I had arranged for champagne toasts, and as the best friend of my mother's stood to offer the first one, I felt a flutter of anticipation. As the toasts continued, friend after friend shared warm memories and congratulations. My father then stood up to give his speech, thanking everyone for coming. He thanked his brother for making the trip, my mother's friends, for their years of friendship, and then turned to Amber, and our beautiful daughter Amber, who took time away from her important job as assistant manager to be here. Thank you for the lovely card and for always being our sunshine. I waited for him to acknowledge me next, the daughter who had planned and paid for the entire evening. But instead, he raised his glass and said, "To 30 more years," as everyone applauded. My mother then took the microphone, echoing my father's thanks to everyone. She specifically thanked Amber for the beautiful store-bought cake she had brought as a backup dessert, a $30 grocery store sheet cake that sat untouched next to my custom creation. And thanks to everyone who helped put this lovely evening together, she concluded vaguely, never once mentioning my name or my contribution. As dessert was served, I excused myself and went to the restroom, locking myself in a stall as tears threatened to fall. After composing myself, I returned to find Amber showing everyone pictures of her store's new display that she had designed. "Jessica, isn't this amazing?" my mother gushed, showing me Amber's phone. She did all this herself, and her district manager is considering her for Employee of the Month. Something inside me snapped. I smiled tightly and asked my parents to join me outside for a moment. In the restaurant's garden area, away from guests, I finally confronted them. "I planned this entire evening," I said quietly. "I paid for everything. The venue, the food, the music, the cake, even flew in relatives. And neither of you thought to thank me or even acknowledge my role in your celebration." My father looked uncomfortable. "Now, Jessica, this isn't the time for—" "It never is the time, is it?" I interrupted. "It wasn't the time when you skipped my graduation for Amber's promotion party. It's never the time to acknowledge anything I do." My mother sighed dramatically. "You're successful, Jessica. You don't need recognition like Amber does. She's still finding her way, and positive reinforcement is important for her." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Don't I deserve positive reinforcement too? Don't I deserve parents who show up for my important moments?" "You've always been independent," my father said, as if it were a justification. "We're proud of you, but you don't need us making a fuss. You're established, you have a great job. Amber needs more support." "I've needed you too," I whispered. "I've just learned not to show it because you've never been there for me." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We've always been there for both our girls." "Really? Where were you when I graduated? Where were you when I got promoted to senior engineer? Where were you when I needed help with college tuition while you paid for Amber's—" "We're not having this conversation right now," my father said firmly. "We have guests waiting." As they turned to go back inside, my mother added, "And Jessica, try not to make everything about yourself. This is our anniversary after all." I stood alone in the garden, a profound clarity washing over me. Nothing I ever did would be enough. No amount of money, success, or support would earn me the place in their hearts that Amber occupied effortlessly. I returned to the party, maintained a mechanical smile, and played the perfect hostess. But as I drove home that night, I made my decision. It was time to stop enabling the toxic relationship that had been draining me emotionally and financially for years. The anniversary celebration wasn't just a party, it was the final evidence I needed to see that nothing would ever change unless I changed it myself. The Monday after my parents' anniversary party, I made an emergency appointment with Dr. Reynolds. I arrived at her office, still wearing my work clothes, having come directly from the office. "I'm done." I told her, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "I can't keep doing this." Dr. Reynolds nodded encouragingly. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm going to stop paying their rent. I'm going to stop being their bank. I just don't know how to do it without." Without feeling overwhelming guilt, she finished for me. "Exactly." We spent the session developing a plan for withdrawing financial support in a way that would give my parents time to adjust while protecting my own emotional health. Dr. Reynolds suggested a gradual approach rather than an abrupt cutoff. You could give them a timeline, perhaps 3 months, to find alternative arrangements, she suggested. That gives them time to adjust their budget, look for additional income, or find less expensive housing. 3 months seems fair, I agreed. I've been supporting them for 3 years. 3 months' notice doesn't seem unreasonable. We also discussed setting clear boundaries around communication and how to handle the inevitable emotional manipulation that would follow. "Remember that guilt is a tool they've used to control you," Dr. Reynolds cautioned. "When they try to make you feel guilty, and they will, recognize it for what it is, a manipulation tactic, not a reflection of reality." That weekend, I drove to my parents' house, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I had rehearsed what I would say, but still felt unprepared for the confrontation. I chose a Saturday morning, knowing Amber would be working and wouldn't be there to add to the tension. My parents seemed surprised by my unannounced visit, but welcomed me in. My mother was making coffee, and my father was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. A scene of domestic tranquility that almost made me reconsider my decision. Almost. "I need to talk to you both about something important." I began declining my mother's offer of coffee. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked immediately, looking concerned. "Are you sick?" "No, I'm not sick. This is about the financial support I've been providing." My father put down his newspaper, suddenly attentive. "What about it?" I took a deep breath. "For the past 3 years, I've been paying your rent and covering many of your expenses. I've done this willingly because you're my parents and I love you. But I've realized this arrangement isn't healthy for any of us." "What are you saying?" my mother asked, her voice sharpening. "I'm saying that I'll continue to pay your rent for the next 3 months, but after that, you'll need to make other arrangements. I won't be providing financial support anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Then both of them started speaking at once. "You can't be serious. After everything we've done for you, we're your parents." I raised a hand, surprising myself with my own composure. "I've made my decision. You have 3 months to adjust your budget, find additional income, or move to a less expensive place. I'm happy to help you look at options, but the financial support ends after October." My father's face reddened with anger. "This is how you repay us for raising you, by abandoning us when we need you." "I'm not abandoning you," I said calmly. "I'm changing the nature of our relationship. I'll still be your daughter. I'll still visit and call. I just won't be your financial provider anymore." "We can't afford our rent without you," my mother cried, tears already forming. "We'll be homeless." "You have options," I replied. "Dad could come out of early retirement. You could get a part-time job, Mom. You could downsize to a smaller apartment. You have 3 months to figure it out. The conversation deteriorated from there. My father called me selfish and ungrateful. My mother cried and asked what they had done to deserve such treatment. When I mentioned my graduation, they dismissed it as one missed event that I couldn't let go of. I left their house feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely liberated. That evening, I sent them an email detailing the timeline for the withdrawal of financial support listing, potential resources for financial assistance, and reaffirming that I was changing the nature of our relationship, not ending it. The backlash was swift and severe. Within an hour of sending the email, my phone exploded with texts and calls. Amber was the first to contact me. "What the actual hell, Jessica?" she screamed when I answered. "You're abandoning our parents. How could you be so selfish?" "I'm not abandoning them," I replied, struggling to maintain my calm. "I'm just not paying their rent anymore after a 3-month transition period." "Same thing. They can't afford to live without your help. What are they supposed to do?" "The same thing most adults do. Work to support themselves." Amber's voice turned venomous. "You think you're so much better than everyone with your fancy tech job. Some of us actually care about family more than money." "This isn't about money," I tried to explain. "It's about—" "Save it," she interrupted. "I always knew you were selfish, but this is a new low. Don't expect to be welcome in this family if you go through with this." After Amber's call came a series of increasingly desperate messages from my parents. My father claimed to be having chest pains from the stress. My mother sent a photo of herself crying. I showed these messages to Megan and Dr. Reynolds, both of whom helped me see them for what they were: manipulation tactics. To maintain my resolve, I temporarily blocked my family on social media. Seeing their posts and photos would only weaken my determination. I also began declining their calls after the conversations turned toxic, communicating only by email where I could maintain emotional distance. My coworker James noticed my distraction at work and offered a sympathetic ear. Over lunch, I explained the situation, half expecting judgment. Instead, he shared that he had gone through something similar with his brother, who had relied on him financially for years. "It was the hardest thing I ever did cutting him off," James admitted. "But it was also the best thing for both of us. He's actually standing on his own 2 feet now, and our relationship, while still complicated, is more honest." His understanding was a lifeline during the difficult weeks that followed. As the first month of the 3-month period passed, my parents' tactics shifted from guilt to promises of change. They'd do better, they said. They'd acknowledge my achievements more. They'd be more grateful. All I had to do was reconsider my decision. I stood firm. At the beginning of the 3rd month, I sent a final email, reminding them that the support would end in 30 days. I also included links to affordable housing options, job listings for people returning to the workforce after retirement, and financial counseling services. The response was a formal email from my father. "We understand. We'll figure something out. But know that this decision has consequences for our relationship moving forward." On October 31st, I made the final rent payment. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Guilt, certainly, but also relief. And a strange sense of pride in finally standing up for myself. I sent a brief professional email confirming the payment had been made and that it would be the last one. Then I blocked their numbers just for the weekend, giving myself space to process the milestone without immediate backlash. I needed to catch my breath before facing whatever came next. Number. Part 7. The Family Backlash. November began with an eerie silence from my parents. After months of emotional manipulation and increasingly desperate attempts to change my mind, The sudden quiet was unsettling. It lasted exactly 3 days. On November 4th, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Jessica, it's Aunt Patricia. My mother's older sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in at least 2 years. I need to talk to you about your parents. Over the next 20 minutes, Aunt Patricia berated me for abandoning my family. She had clearly heard only my parents' version of events, that I had suddenly and cruelly cut them off financially without warning or reason. They gave you everything growing up, she insisted. They sacrificed so much for your education. I almost laughed at that. They didn't pay a penny for my education, Aunt Patricia. I worked 3 jobs through college while they paid for Amber's tuition. That's not what they told me, she replied, her certainty wavering slightly. I'm sure it isn't. That call was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I received similar calls from 5 other relatives, each fed the same distorted narrative. My Uncle Howard threatened to disown me. My grandparents expressed their deep disappointment. Even cousins I barely knew reached out to tell me how shocked they were by my cruel behavior. The family narrative quickly solidified Jessica, the successful but cold-hearted daughter, had abandoned her loving parents out of selfishness and greed, leaving them potentially homeless while she hoarded her tech salary. Through a mutual friend, I learned that my sister Amber was the primary architect of this smear campaign. She had created a private family Facebook group called Support for Robert and Karen, where she posted daily updates about my parents' struggle to survive after being financially cut off without warning by their own daughter. These posts deliberately omitted key facts: the 3 months' notice I had given, the years of support I had provided, the resources I had offered to help them transition, and most importantly, the context of their years of emotional neglect culminating in missing my graduation for Amber's promotion party. I might never have known the full extent of the campaign against me if not for my cousin Rachel. Unlike the rest of the family, she called me with a different approach. I've been seeing Amber's posts, she said hesitantly. But something doesn't add up. You've never been cruel or selfish as long as I've known you. I wanted to hear your side before jumping to conclusions. Fighting back tears of gratitude for this small act of fairness, I explained the full situation. Rachel listened without interruption, occasionally making shocked sounds as I detailed the graduation incident and the years of favoritism. That doesn't sound like the aunt and uncle I know, she admitted when I finished. But it also doesn't sound like something you'd make up. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. Rachel became my unexpected ally, occasionally updating me on what was being said in the family group and defending me when she could without drawing too much fire herself. Meanwhile, the situation escalated. Late one night, I received a series of threatening text messages from my father's phone. You'll regret turning your back on this family. Hope you're happy in your fancy apartment while your mother cries herself to sleep. And most disturbingly, what goes around comes around. Remember that. I screenshot these messages and sent them to Dr. Reynolds, who advised me to document everything but not respond. This is the extinction burst, she explained. When manipulation stops working, it often intensifies before it finally stops. The following week brought the most humiliating incident yet. My mother showed up unannounced at my workplace, causing a scene in the reception area. Teary-eyed and dramatic, she loudly proclaimed that her daughter was letting her become homeless, begging the receptionist to talk some sense into Jessica. Security was called and my boss Michael came out to assess the situation. By the time I was notified and came downstairs, my mother was being escorted from the building, sobbing theatrically about ungrateful children, and after all we've done for her. I was mortified, certain this would affect my professional reputation. Instead, Michael pulled me into his office afterward, with unexpected kindness. "Family issues can be complicated," he said simply. "My door is open if you need to talk, but otherwise this incident won't be mentioned again." His discretion and understanding left me speechless with gratitude. The final shock came when I returned home one evening to find my apartment door ajar. Heart pounding, I called building security before cautiously entering. Inside, I found a chaotic scene. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered, and most disturbingly, family photos smashed on the floor. Nothing valuable was taken. Not my laptop, not my jewelry, not even the cash I kept in my desk drawer. This wasn't a robbery. It was vandalism with a message. While I couldn't prove who did it, the timing and nature of the damage left little doubt in my mind that Amber was involved. The building's security footage showed a woman in a hoodie and sunglasses who matched Amber's height and billed entering the building by following another resident through the security door. The footage wasn't clear enough to make a positive identification, but it strengthened my suspicions. I filed a police report but decided not to press charges without definitive proof. Instead, I had my locks changed, installed a security camera at my door, and informed building management about the situation. That night, as I cleaned up the mess and assessed the damage, I realized something important. Despite the backlash, despite the smear campaign, despite even this violation of my home, I didn't regret my decision. For the first time in my adult life, I was setting boundaries and refusing to be exploited by the people who should have loved me most. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But beneath the pain was a growing sense of self-worth that felt more valuable than any family approval I had ever craved. By mid-November, the reality of their situation began to hit my parents. I learned through Rachel that they had received an eviction warning from their landlord. After decades of financial irresponsibility, they had no savings to fall back on, and neither had made any serious efforts to find work during the 3-month notice period I'd given them. Instead of addressing their situation practically, they escalated their attempts to force me back into the role of provider. Their tactics took an increasingly desperate turn. First came the reputation attack. My parents began telling neighbors and community members that I was abusive and had controlled them financially for years, only to cruelly cut them off without warning. They painted themselves as victims of financial elder abuse in reverse, claiming I had made them dependent on me deliberately, only to pull the rug out from under them. One evening, I received a call from Mrs. Winters, an elderly neighbor of my parents who had known me since childhood. Her voice was cold as she asked, "Jessica, is it true you're forcing your parents out of their home after all they've done for you?" "That's not exactly what's happening," I tried to explain, but she cut me off. "They told me everything. How you manipulated them into relying on your money and then abandoned them. I never thought you were that kind of person." Before I could defend myself, she hung up. This conversation repeated itself with various family, friends, and community members. My parents had launched a full-scale character assassination campaign. Amber took their strategy a step further, creating misleading posts on social media that stopped just short of outright lies. Praying for my parents tonight as they face possible homelessness because someone who promised to help them changed their mind, she wrote, tagging mutual friends and family members. While she never mentioned me by name, everyone knew who she was talking about. These public attacks were painful, but they paled in comparison to what came next. On a Tuesday morning, I received an official-looking envelope at my office. Inside was a formal letter from an attorney named Harold Grossman, claiming to represent my parents. The letter alleged that I had entered into a verbal contract with my parents 3 years ago, promising to provide lifetime financial support in exchange for parental care and guidance during my formative years. It claimed that my parents had organized their retirement and financial affairs based on this promise. and that my withdrawal of support constituted a breach of contract causing severe financial and emotional distress. The letter demanded that I resume paying their rent immediately and compensate them for the anxiety and hardship caused by the temporary disruption of payments or face legal action. I sat at my desk, hands shaking, as I read the letter twice, then 3 times. I knew there was no legal merit to these claims. I had never promised lifetime support, and even if I had, such a vague verbal agreement would hardly be enforceable. But the threat of a lawsuit, however, baseless, was terrifying. I immediately called Sarah Chen, an attorney who had given a talk on financial planning at my company the previous year. She agreed to meet me that afternoon. "This is what we call a nuisance letter," Sarah said, after reviewing the document. "There's no legitimate legal claim here, but they're hoping to scare you into compliance." "Should I be worried?" I asked. "About losing a lawsuit? No. About the stress and possible expense of dealing with this." "Possibly." She tapped the letter. "But I noticed something interesting. This attorney isn't with a reputable firm. Let me make some inquiries." The next day, Sarah called back with news. Harold Grossman is barely hanging on to his law license. He has several ethics complaints and specializes in sending threatening letters for clients with questionable claims. He rarely follows through with actual lawsuits because he knows they'll be dismissed. With Sarah's guidance, I drafted a formal response denying all claims, documenting the 3 months' notice I had provided, and warning that any further harassment could result in my own legal action against them. Sarah sent it from her firm's address, adding professional weight to the response. We never heard from Harold Grossman again. But my parents weren't finished. As their financial situation grew more desperate, my father tried a new tactic: identity theft. I discovered this by accident when I received a notification about a credit inquiry for a card application I hadn't submitted. Alarmed, I immediately pulled my credit report and found 3 new credit cards opened in my name within the past month, all with balances already approaching their limits. The cards had been sent to my parents' address, possible because I had lived there briefly after college. The purchases were clearly my parents'. Charges at their regular grocery store payments to their utility companies, and most tellingly, a $500 purchase at Amber's clothing store, where she could have given them her employee discount. I was devastated. This wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It was criminal fraud. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I made an appointment with a local police department to file a report. The officer who took my statement was matter of fact. Unfortunately, we see this kind of family fraud quite often. "Are you sure you want to proceed with charges?" "Most people back out when it's family." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They left me no choice. The investigation moved slowly, but within weeks, the evidence was undeniable. My parents had indeed opened credit accounts in my name, forging my signature on applications and intercepting the cards before I could know they existed. They had charged over $12,000 across the 3 cards in just 1 month. On the advice of both Sarah and the police, I also filed for a temporary restraining order against my parents and Amber. The vandalism of my apartment, the threatening text messages, the workplace confrontation, and now the identity theft formed a pattern of escalating harassment that warranted legal protection. The day I received the approved restraining order was both vindicating and heartbreaking. I had official documentation that my own family posed a danger to me, a reality so far from the loving relationship I had always craved that it seemed surreal. Rachel called that evening, her voice low and serious. "I thought you should know, your parents got the restraining order today. They're telling everyone it's further proof of your cruelty." I sighed beyond being surprised by their distortions. And what do you think I asked? Suddenly needing to know if I had lost my one family ally. I think Rachel said slowly that people don't get restraining orders for no reason. And I think credit fraud is a serious crime, not a family misunderstanding. I'm still on your side, Jessica. Those simple words, I'm still on your side, brought tears to my eyes. In the midst of losing my immediate family, I had found unexpected support from the edges of my extended one. That night alone in my apartment, with my new security system armed, I realized that the worst had happened. I had been completely rejected by my parents, and sister labeled as the villain in their story, and even become the victim of their criminal actions. Yet somehow I was still standing. The fear of losing my family had always controlled me, but now that it had actually happened, I found myself stronger than I had imagined possible. By December, I'd had enough of being the villain in my family's narrative. After months of absorbing their attacks while saying little in my defense, I decided it was time to reclaim my story. With Sarah's legal guidance and Dr. Reynolds' emotional support, I developed a strategy to set the record straight. The first step was documentation. I created a comprehensive file of evidence bank statements showing years of payments to my parents, text messages, and emails, documenting the 3-month notice period, the threatening messages from my father, police reports about apartment vandalism, credit fraud documentation, and the restraining order. Next came the difficult decision of how public to make this information. I had no interest in destroying my parents, but I needed key people to understand the truth. After careful consideration, I arranged a small gathering at my apartment with the family members I most wanted to reach: my grandparents, 2 aunts who had been particularly vocal in condemning me, and Rachel, who helped convince them to attend. I've been silent about what's really happened because airing family problems publicly seemed wrong. I began when everyone was seated, but the campaign against me has forced my hand. I want you to know the full truth with evidence so you can make your own judgments. Over the next hour, I methodically walked them through the entire situation. My years of financial support, the graduation incident, the anniversary party, the 3 months' notice, and the subsequent harassment and fraud. For each claim, I provided documentation letting the evidence speak for itself. My grandmother wept when she saw the credit card statements in my name. My aunts sat in stunned silence as they read the threatening text messages. By the time I finished, the mood in the room had shifted dramatically. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" my grandfather asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you have believed me without all this proof?" I countered gently. When family chooses sides, evidence often matters less than loyalty. They couldn't argue with that. Before leaving, my grandmother hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm so sorry we doubted you." Word spread quickly through the extended family. I hadn't asked my relatives to confront my parents or take public stances, but many did so anyway. The narrative began to shift as people questioned my parents' version of events. Meanwhile, I was healing and growing stronger. At work, I received a significant promotion to lead engineer with a substantial salary increase. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that I wasn't sending a third of my income to my parents, I was financially thriving. I also began setting healthy boundaries in all my relationships, not just with family. I stopped overcommitting at work. I started saying no to friends when I needed time for myself. I even began dating again after years of putting my personal life on hold. James, my supportive coworker, asked me out for coffee that gradually evolved into something more. Unlike previous relationships where I had poured everything into caring for others, this one felt balanced and healthy. James respected my boundaries and encouraged my independence. My friendship with Rachel deepened as well. Though technically my second cousin, she became more like a sister to me. The kind of sister who celebrated my successes rather than resenting them. Through her, I occasionally heard updates about my parents and Amber, though I tried not to dwell on them. According to Rachel, my parents had been forced to downsize, significantly moving from their 3-bedroom house to a 1-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. My father had reluctantly come out of early retirement, taking a part-time job at a hardware store. My mother had found work as a receptionist at a local business, and Amber, suddenly faced with parents who could no longer subsidize her lifestyle, was struggling to adjust to financial independence. In January, I made another difficult decision. After consulting with Sarah, I decided to publicly address the situation on social media. I had discovered that Amber was still maintaining the support for Robert and Karen group, though with dwindling engagement as family members learned the truth. My post was simple and factual. For those who have heard rumors about my relationship with my parents, yes, after supporting them financially for 3 years, I gave them 3 months' notice that I would stop paying their rent. This decision came after a pattern of behavior, including missing my master's graduation to attend my sister's promotion party. Since then, I've been subjected to harassment, vandalism, and identity theft, resulting in a restraining order and criminal charges. I'm not sharing this for sympathy, but to set the record straight. I believe in facing consequences for one's choices, both theirs and mine. I'm at peace with my decision and moving forward with my life. I attached no documentation, made no specific accusations, and named no names. Yet the post spread quickly among mutual connections, finally giving those who had only heard my parents' version a glimpse of the other side. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of messages poured in, some from people apologizing for believing the worst about me, others from individuals sharing similar experiences with family financial abuse. Most touchingly, several came from old friends who had drifted away during my years of isolation, reaching out to reconnect. My post had another unintended consequence. 2 weeks later, Rachel called to tell me she had received a letter from Amber addressed to me. Given the restraining order, Amber couldn't contact me directly, so she had used Rachel as an intermediary. "Do you want me to send it to you, or should I just throw it away?" Rachel asked. I hesitated, then decided, "Send it. I'll read it when I'm ready." The letter arrived 3 days later. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for another 2 before finally opening it one Sunday morning with James sitting supportively nearby. Amber's handwriting was familiar, bringing an unexpected wave of nostalgia. "Jessica, I don't expect you to forgive me or them. What happened with your graduation was wrong. So was everything that followed. I was part of it, and I can't undo that. The truth is, I've been jealous of you my whole life. You were always so capable, so smart, so together. I felt like I could never measure up, so I took the easy way out, letting Mom and Dad favor me because it was convenient. I helped them harass you. I vandalized your apartment. I used my employee discount to help them commit fraud with your credit cards. I can't take any of it back. We're all facing reality now. Mom and Dad are working for the first time in years. I'm learning to pay my own bills. It's hard, but maybe it's necessary. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that your post made me see things differently. Amber." I put the letter down, surprised to find tears on my cheeks. It wasn't an adequate apology, perhaps nothing could be, but it was an acknowledgement. After months of being gaslit and villainized, that small recognition of reality felt unexpectedly powerful. I didn't respond to the letter. The restraining order remained in place, and I had no desire to reopen communication. But somehow, knowing that at least one member of my family had glimpsed the truth lightened a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. By spring, I had built a life that looked nothing like the one I'd had a year earlier. I had a higher position at work, a healthy relationship, stronger friendships, and a support system built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my own narrative and found peace with my decisions. I had lost my family of origin, but in the process, discovered something more valuable: my own worth, independent of anyone else's validation or approval. 1 year after I stopped paying my parents' rent, I found myself sitting on the balcony of my new house, a modest but charming 3-bedroom that I had purchased with the money I used to send to my family. The spring breeze carried the scent of the garden I had planted, something I'd always wanted but never had time for when working overtime to support my parents. James sat beside me, our fingers intertwined as we watched the sunset. Inside, Megan and Rachel were setting up for the small dinner party we were hosting, a celebration of my first year of true independence. The restraining order against my parents and Amber had expired 3 months earlier. I had chosen not to renew it, not because I wanted to resume contact, but because it no longer seemed necessary. The harassment had stopped. The credit fraud case had been settled, with my parents agreeing to a payment plan to reimburse me for the stolen funds. The family smear campaign had largely dissolved as the truth spread. Dr. Reynolds had helped me understand that healing doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. Sometimes the healthiest outcome is peaceful separation, she had explained during one of our now monthly sessions. You can forgive someone without allowing them back into your life. That's exactly what I had done. Found forgiveness within myself without reopening the door to further abuse. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when I woke up, filled with doubt, questioning if I had been too harsh, too final in my decision. But those moments grew increasingly rare as I built a life filled with genuine connections and mutual support. Through therapy, I had come to recognize the damage done by years of being the responsible one in a family that took advantage of my sense of duty. I learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. Most importantly, I discovered that I had value beyond what I could provide for others. 2 weeks after the restraining order expired, I had received a formal letter from my parents. Unlike their previous communications, this one contained no demands, no accusations, and no manipulation. Instead, it was a stiff, awkward acknowledgement that mistakes were made on both sides and that they were adjusting to their new circumstances. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was a step away from the entitlement that had characterized our relationship for so long. The letter ended with an invitation to consider reopening communication at some point in the future. I had shown the letter to Dr. Reynolds, who noted, "They're still not taking full responsibility, but there's a recognition of reality here that wasn't present before. How do you feel about their invitation?" "Not ready," I had answered, honestly. "Maybe someday, but not now. I'm still healing." She had nodded approvingly. That's a healthy response. Reconciliation, if it ever happens, should come from strength, not obligation. As I sat on my balcony that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. My parents were now both working full-time for the first time in decades. According to Rachel, they had adjusted to their smaller apartment and simpler lifestyle, though not without complaint. Amber had been promoted to store manager and had moved into her own place, no longer relying on our parents for support. In a way, my decision had forced all of them to grow up, my sister, literally my parents, figuratively. The family dynamic that had kept us all trapped in our roles had been painfully but definitively broken. Inside, the timer beeped, signaling that dinner was ready. As James and I moved to join our friends, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had built this life, this home, these relationships, this stability, not by sacrificing myself for others' comfort, but by valuing myself enough to set boundaries. The dinner that night was filled with laughter and genuine warmth. As we raised our glasses in a toast, Megan looked at me with pride. To Jessica, she said, who taught us all that sometimes the strongest thing you can say is no. I smiled, thinking of the long journey that had led me here. And to chosen family, I added, who love you for who you are, not what you can give them. Later, after everyone had left and James had gone home, I sat alone in my living room, savoring the quiet contentment that had become increasingly familiar. My phone pinged with a text from Rachel. Dinner was amazing. So proud of how far you've come. Love you, cuz. Those simple words, proud of you, once so rarely directed at me by my family of origin, now came frequently from the family I had chosen. The painful irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years trying to earn validation from people who were incapable of giving it, while overlooking those who offered it freely. The journey hadn't been easy. Standing up to family conditioning and guilt is perhaps one of the hardest things a person can do. But on the other side of that difficulty was a life I had never imagined possible. One where I wasn't constantly drained by one-sided relationships, where my achievements were celebrated rather than exploited, where I love you didn't come with hidden price tags. I had learned that true family, whether related by blood or by choice, supports your growth rather than stunting it for their benefit. I had discovered that setting boundaries isn't selfish but essential. And perhaps most importantly, I had found that sometimes walking away from toxic relationships is not just an act of self-preservation, but one of self-respect. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The exhausted, resentful woman who had once stared back at me had been replaced by someone with clear eyes and a genuine smile. I had stopped paying my parents' rent, yes, but in the process, I had stopped paying the much heavier price of my own self-worth. And that was a lesson worth every difficult moment of the journey. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from family who took advantage of you? What boundaries have you set in your own life that helped you grow stronger? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and finding your worth, and share with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to put themselves first. Sometimes. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your value isn't measured by what you give to others, but by how you honor yourself.